that's a spicy meatball, that is. Oh, I'm liking that. In this video, it's Rita's hotter sister. I'm putting an MG ZT 190 Plus through its paces. So for those not in the know, Rita is a Rover 75 diesel that I sold fairly recently. And this is the sporty brethren or sister, whatever you want to make of it. This is the MG ZT. Now the history is quite involved here. The Rover 75 was developed while BMW was in charge of Rover. BMW bought Rover in 1994, quickly became slightly horrified at what they'd taken on, and even at the launch of the Rover 75, the boss of BMW mostly complained about how bad things were at at Rover, and how desperate they were to get rid of it. They decided they didn't want to make Rovers anymore. It was a bad idea, so they took Land Rover, they took the Mini brand, and sold the rest to the Phoenix 4. Four people who, the views on them vary, because they seem to mostly use MG Rover to line their pension pot, and then MG Rover went bust because it had no money. But it wasn't all bad. They were instrumental in relaunching the MG brand. I mean, there was already the MGF in production, but they quickly realized that they could build a sporty range of cars, the ZR, the ZS and the ZT as here, based on existing Rover models. Suddenly these cars would have much more showroom appeal. They wouldn't be seen as so fuddy-duddy. But while it looks like a Rover 75 with a sporty grille and some blinging alloys, these are aftermarket alloys, I don't believe they were standard, it's more than that, especially in the case of the ZT. They did considerable re-engineering. So where the Rover used rubber subframe mounts, this uses aluminium, so everything's a bit stiffer. Spring rates, damper rates, all changed. And must be said, the exhaust note on this example is particularly tasty. And the styling redesign was done by Peter Stevens, and that definitely helps revitalize the company's fortunes. Not enough, it turned out. When the MG ZT was launched in 2001, few could have foreseen that just 4 years later, MG Rover would be completely bust, completely bankrupt, and it was the end. And it's a shame, because I think this is a very good car. It has some German development, it has some British development. It's a very interesting car. This is a facelifted version, came out in 2004. So we've got slightly different headlamp units and a bit of a redesign on the grille, I think. I mean, the panel gaps are not joyous. I mean, I can get my fingers in there. I can almost check the oil without having to lift the bonnet. So quality could and was an issue. But in terms of driving dynamics, the MGs were good. Magazines raved about them. So I'm looking forward to putting this car through its paces. I've never driven an MG version of the later Rovers. So yeah, I've been waiting for this moment a long time. I think we'll start under the bonnet, because things are very different again to my Rover 75. So we should go and find the bonnet release, because it's weird. I kind of know my way around this car, but also I don't, because the MGs are so very, very different. There we go. Under the bonnet we have the KV6, 24 valve quad cam V6 engine. I had a Rover 45 with a 2-litre version of this, but this is the full-blown 2.5 litre, 190 brake horse. I think there were only 180 brake horse in the Rovers, so already we've got a bit of a leap in power, but makes all the right noises. Has variable intake runners to boost the low down torque. This one seems to have lost some of its power steering gubbins, not power steering, sorry, air conditioning gubbins, but I already know the alternator is much more accessible than it is on the diesel version. You could get a diesel MG ZT if you so wished, but surely the only reason to want one of these cars is the V6 engine. You could even get a 1.8 turbo 4-cylinder petrol. Not recommended. That engine already a bit of a head gasket liability. Why would you add forced induction to make it even worse? We can see the brakes are truly enormous. Reconditioned caliper going on there, so that's good. And if we head inside, the transformation continues with these very sporty bucket seats. These things actually hug your kidneys, so that's very different to the Rover as well. And there's other improvements too. So as we can see just from the dials, the cozy ambience of the Rover is gone. We've got aluminium, we've got much more purposeful dials, that cozy glow abandoned for the sake of sportiness. But otherwise it's all very similar. This is straight out of a Rover 75. Looks very BMW. In use, it's had a stereo replacement, so rather than the built-in unit, it's got an aftermarket stereo, and a gear knob which is vastly superior to the Rover. It sits much more nicely in the hand. The Rover one's a really odd shape, so I do like that. We've got hazard lights down here, same nice glow from the indicators. I really like that for some reason. I find that a good feature. And centre vents that can be hot or cold depending on your preference. I like that feature as well. Still no cup holder there, but there is one hidden away there, slightly low on the count for those cubbies over there. But yeah, these sporty seats are absolutely magnificent, really comfortable. The sporty theme continues in the rear as well. A much firmer seat, not quite so much give in it, but you know, we've got vents here for ventilation. We've got whatever is in here. Oh, various things. I wonder if the owner knows those are in there. Renovate cream and a bottle of water. There we go, fruity water hidden in the center armrest, and 3 head restraints. But yeah, there's a decent amount of space in here. It's not the most space given the size of the car. That was the problem with the Rover 75 we had. In terms of interior space, they're not actually that good, but it's certainly comfortable. You wouldn't mind sitting here, but on a longer journey, if you've got a few bags and stuff, it's going to feel cramped. And this is a big car to have that vibe going on. Part of the MG redesign is this rather funky spoiler. That seems to fit nicely. And of course, we've got the MG Octagon. Not the first saloon cars to have basically be Rovers that have turned into sports cars. We've got the Maestro, Metro and Montego in the 1980s. But it's a fairly spacious boot. It's amazing how quickly this boot fills up though. And under here, a space saver spare, but I suppose that means you've got a bit more storage under there, so maybe that's not all bad. But very nice hinges, so they don't intrude in the load area. Some cars, the hinges swing down and you lose a bit of storage space. Not here. Very nicely engineered. Now before we get underway, I'm already complaining about the clutch. The clutch is way too heavy, and that's exactly the same as the Rover 75 I had. I think the clutches can work harden, so the pressure just gets higher and higher as the mileage goes up. This one's got 121,000 miles on the clock. It reckons it is 50 degrees centigrade outside. I'm inclined to disagree. Sadly no air conditioning, so I'm having to drive with the window open, but that means we can hear the noise, which is pleasant. Bit of a top end tap. I wonder if that's a hydraulic tappet, so that's a K-series thing. But yeah, it sounds very purposeful. That is a different kettle of fish to the diesel engine, isn't it? It's very strange to be in something that feels so familiar, yet is so obviously different. Oh, we have failed to do a windscreen wiper test. Let's just bring you around for that. Yeah. Blades could be better. Slight triangle of doom, not too bad. Can be engineered out by fitting different wiper blades, but yes, not quite perfect. So yeah, the wiping performance could be better, and the clutch is heavy. But once you start moving, you kind of stop thinking about it almost entirely. Oh, that feels spicy. There's the power I was missing in my Rover 75, which had a slightly sickly BMW diesel engine. It wasn't quite pulling as well as it should. Oh yes, that sounds magnificent. It's a lovely sounding engine, the KV6, and it sounds more muscular here than it did in my Rover 45. That had the Jatco 5-speed gearbox, I don't think you could specify the MGs with an automatic, but yeah, what a lovely sounding engine. Again, people will tell you that the KV6 engine is horrifically flawed, but they're not really. It's a very strong engine. The problem is, when it came out in the Rover 800, which it did originally, right towards the end of 800 production, the engines were practically hand-built and kind of, in the typical British way, tested on the public, and they proved very fragile, very adept at blowing head gaskets. But Rover tried again, and the engine was reworked a fair bit before going into ZT. I'm pretty sure BMW may have insisted it was reworked, and the result was an engine that is much better, much more reliable. I'm not saying it won't blow head gaskets, but they are considerably more robust in that regard. There are downsides. They've got 3 timing belts, well, one for each bank at the front, and then there's one to link the other 2 camshafts at the back, I believe, and that means a belt change is going to be expensive. I know the owner paid 1,200 quid to have that job done on this car. It's a lot of labour, and that is a problem. As the cars became such low value, that was a problem. Who was going to fork out that sort of money? I believe there are companies, some of who are mobile, who will do it for less, but there's no getting away from it. It's a fairly sizable job, and I'm not sure what the interval is, but it's going to be weighing on your mind a little, I think. My 45 had already had the belts done. That's why I bought it. It's not an engine with lots of torque. This 2.5 is better than the 2 litre. The 2 litre has really no grunt at all. Very refined, but you've got to keep revving it to get the power. And this feels so far a little similar. It will pull low down, but if you're in a hurry, then that's not the way to proceed. I don't know if this is a stock exhaust or not, but it sounds absolutely immense. That's a lovely sound. I mean, is it just me, or is that Alfa Romeo Boost so good? It's astonishing noise. I love V6 engines. They make some of the best noises on the planet. And this KV6 engine, like I say, is wrongly considered a bad one. It really isn't. It's it's a lot more body control than the Rover 75. The 75 handles well, but it handles well despite the body roll. This it's a lot firmer in terms of suspension. It's crashing around a bit, but while it is jarring a little, it's still got enough compliance that I think you could live with it on a daily basis. It's not horrific. Yeah, it's amazing how they've transformed the car from pipe and slippers to something that, you know, dare I say it, it's a bit hooligan-esque. And they did go one stage further. They even developed a V8 version, which was rear-wheel drive and used a 4.6 litre Mustang V8. And I'd like to drive one of those, because I imagine that's a transformation again. I don't think that did much for their finances, having to redevelop a front-wheel drive car like this to a rear-wheel drive one, but an intriguing car nonetheless, I'm sure you'll agree. Oh, that is that's a spicy meatball. That is. Oh, I'm liking that. That is your beans on toast with Worcester sauce. Oh yeah. Yeah, the contrast with the Rover could not really be greater. That engine just revs. Oh, how strange to be in these familiar settings and just to have that amount of power. That's very likeable. But yeah, down low, there's nothing. And then you get to 4,000. Ooh. And things get very blurry indeed. So still missing that low down torque that I, really want. So as good as this car was, it was their inability to develop the next generation of smaller cars that really killed off MG Rover. Oh yes, the owner did say that when you're enjoying yourself, you can kind of see the fuel gauge move. I'm pretty sure it just did. Yeah, it's so much more than just a body kit on a Rover. I guess the only problem is, as exciting as that acceleration is, and it really is, you've got to go ragging the engine to access that power. There's just nothing at lower revs at all. It's I've wondered if it was just a problem with the 2 litre I had in the 45, but no, sadly the 2.5 seems to suffer in exactly the same way. Because as nice as it is to rev an engine, if you're doing it all the time, it just gets tiring, and that's my foot flat to the floor, there is nothing, and then suddenly there's everything. It's almost like it's turbocharged. Obviously very refined as a cruising machine. If I just briefly take her up to an indicated 70, that's a smidge over 3,000 revs, but the engine's so smooth you can barely hear it. Well, there we go. That was the MG ZT, a Rover 75 that has had quite the makeover under the skin as well as bodily. And what a transformation. A very enjoyable drive. So much torter, and that engine, oh, an absolute masterpiece of an engine. Sounds glorious. So I hope you've enjoyed that as much as I have, and looking at the contrasts with the 75, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Farewell.